Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your patience. Hi. I'm Louis Leakey, famed anthropologist, as I and my wife Mary uncovered evidence of a new species of man called Homo habilis, or tool-making man, that lived in Tanzania in East Africa, right here, back about 1.5 million years ago. We uncovered a skull, jawbone, all the things like this. Here we are here too. So we uncovered a very old ancestor to us that lived a little less than 2 million years ago to 1.5 million years ago. We were able to unearth and find their partial skeletal remains and stone tools. Their appearance was small, with short legs, long arms, walked bipedally, had a larger brain, and developed the use of stone tools made for survival. These stone tools look like this. This is called the Oldowan culture, and these tools help this particular species of man help survive. These stone tools look like something like this that you would see. These were sharpened, and they were able to cut into animal skins and other things used for pounding, grinding, scraping, and basically surviving in their area. And they use them for this. So, and particularly like this. So today, I would like to tell you about how man has evolved over time with changing evolutionary traits that explain our survival, overall appearance, physical characteristics, needs, likes, psychological tendencies, thinking, and even how the environment changed over time. This is a story about us and how we progress forward over time to become modern men and women. So, let's start. Apes, monkeys, and chimps evolved from a common ancestor about 15 million years ago. Hominins, or human-like creatures, broke off from this primate ancestral tree 5 to 7 million years ago in the African Rift Valley, as we are indirect descendants of apes. In total, about 22 human species have lived before us, spanning millions of years. All have died out except us. So we'll be talking about these species today, like in the beginning, Ardipithecus ramidus, about 4.5 million years ago. That died out, and the Australopithecus afarensis and other Australopithecus came in season, like Lucy, as well as the one I found, Homo habilis, that changed over time and died out to become Homo erectus, or upright man, that lived about 1.8 million to about 100,000 years ago. Homo heidelbergensis, which became Neanderthal, and Homo sapien, that's us. We've been around for about 300,000 years. So there's been various species. So what did they look like? Well, Ardi was found in the Rift Valley in Ethiopia. Ardi was about 4 feet tall and weighed about 120 pounds and stood somewhat upright, that is, walked bipedally, and would have an ape-like body covered in hair with longer hands for climbing trees, longer arms, and toes adjusted for climbing trees, and looked like this. This would eventually die out to become the Australopithecines right here. One of them was called Lucy, found in 1974 by Johansen, and later on we'll be getting into the ones I found, Habilis, and then Erectus, and then Neanderthal up here. But let's talk about Lucy right now. And I put these techniques in because I developed them over time. My techniques were used then by Dr. Donald Johansen in 1974 to find the Lucy specimens. We used a sieve to find things in the ground, find artifacts, as well as a grid system, a coordinate system that you would use, like a Cartesian coordinate system. And Lucy is what they found that lived about 3.5 million years ago from the skeletal remains. And it was a mixture of human and ape-like features. It was able to walk upright or bipedally. It had more hair on it, more of a robust center tour, shorter legs, longer arms, looked like this. and was able to eat fruits, nuts, and berries, and were scavengers that way. Their brain size is about what you could hold in your hand, about 500 cubic centimeters, or about 3.5 tennis balls. Ours is 10 tennis balls big, so we're going to talk about that also, and how Lucy then survived over time. We know that she walked bipedally because her footprints were preserved in stone. So these are the Australopithecines. Now we're going to be talking about Homo habilis. Actually, that was the next step. This is the one I found. Homo erectus, which is upright man, and then after that, Neanderthal, and then us. Just want to be sure you know the species names that what we're talking about today. And so what makes us human? Easy to say human, but what does that mean? It means ability to bipedally walk on 2 legs, upright, bigger brains, childhood dependencies, use of language and tools, and sometimes we can be defined as what we've lost. We used to have a larger set of teeth used for chewing plants. And over time we became omnivores, eating plants and animals. So our teeth became smaller, and therefore the buttress that supports this, which is really the brow ridge, became smaller over time too. So we've lost a larger brow ridge, as well as the jawline, which is a bit reduced. And what other traits? Well, the use of making complex tools, the odontochlore, opposable thumbs, and our larynx. Our larynx is located down low in the throat. This helps out the tongue move, which helps in speech. This also can be a choking problem with us too, but in primates, they're higher up for many reasons why they can't talk. So these are other characteristics. Early man were mainly gatherers and scavengers, living in small groups, collecting seeds, mushrooms, fruits, and edible plants, and were nomadic, living off the land. Only fortunate ones lived past their 20s, as childbirth, dehydration, starvation, infections, tooth abscesses, broken limbs from falls, that's how Lucy died, hypothermia, that means too cold because they didn't have any protection, attacks from wild animals, and lack of consistent healthy diets or malnutrition did them in. About 7 million years ago, our ancestors climbed trees like this and walked on sometimes all fours like modern chimps, and did this back then. And we want to know, let's compare some species here. This is the Lucy species compared to Homo sapien, which is us. And you will see a bigger rib cage that Lucy had, much bigger shoulders for walking on fours, as long as it was, and sometimes walking bipedally, longer arms and hands. And we we're obviously taller and more leaner looking than that. And what also changed, and was the most important thing, is the hips. So we used to have, right here, one on the left, a tall pelvis. The knee could support the body's weight, the femur and shin bone made a straight line right here, and the toes could curl to grasp branches, and the backbone curved for 4-legged walking. However, over time, we changed from this, which made us walk a lot of times on all fours, to something like this about 5 million years ago, where our hips became smaller but a bit wider, and the shin bone then went in an angle to support bipedal locomotion. So that's why we have a bit of a wide hip and why our shin bone goes in an angle. And our toes would straighten out, and we would have more of an S-shaped spine to support bipedal locomotion. Having this kind of hip, by the way, is still a problem, because we lose 250,000 women every year around the world from childbirth, because the hip is a bit narrow. And the posture and gait also changed over time. The Lucy species was more bent over, longer arms, shorter legs. The head, neck, and back were kind of fused like a one situation with more hair. The one I found, habilis, was a bit straighter up with hair on it, better posture, but still long arms and more simian or ape-like. And though the one we recognize today, which is Homo erectus, which is upright man, would be taller, longer legs, shorter arms, and this comes up to modern man. You can see he has very long legs, shorter arms, and with features like distinguishable features between the head, neck, and shoulders. So this is how we changed our posture over time. And as far as running goes, by 1.8 million years ago, our ancestors developed longer legs, making it easier to travel long distances and develop the ability to run. The new stride made us balanced while running. A more upright figure and generational alterations to feet plus toes made stable platforms. So the Lucy species might run like this. One I found like this. Erectus a little bit better in running, but Homo sapien, us, we do much better at running. Look how powerful our quadriceps are, and shorter arms. We can run up to 20 miles per hour in short distances and 10 to 12 miles per hour for 2 or 3 hours straight. No other animal can do that kind of situation. So we changed over time. So why is this kind of posture and gait important? Well, instead of walking on all fours, early men could walk bipedally easier because it's much harder to walk on 4 than it is on 2. Thereby walking faster, hunting prey quicker, or running faster from animal attacks, and could see over tall grass plains, carry things such as stone tools, or gathered up fruits, nuts, and tubers, and could carry a baby also. So the 2 hands made us free, so to speak, to move about the area. And because male and females, with our species in particular, is dimorphism, which means they are pretty much alike, except men are about 10% bigger than women. This all led to something called, that would stabilize and become the nuclear family, which is monogamy. Monogamy was important back in the day because it made it much easier for people to survive. 2 do a lot better than 1 when it comes to surviving. And males would fight less between each other and wouldn't war so much, and then they wouldn't kill offspring when they do, like infanticide. Monogamy made each sex concentrate on one person. Life was easier this way and ensured more fidelity between paired up couples and less patrolling the area by males for intruders. And having polygamous relationships takes up a lot of energy. Also, males with one partner would take on more parental roles that would help raise offspring. Human children take many years to develop, and with both parents rearing the child would probably survive longer. So you want to pick a partner that supported the survival of the family and, by extension, the small community you're in. Actually, this is how honesty and sincerity came about between couples, because you need to have that to be able to raise a family. And this is allo-parenting, or having other people get involved in your social group to watch children. When the parents were away, we noticed this with lions and chimps. Lions also, the female lions would do this. So cooperation and socialization means it really takes a village to raise a family. This is how monogamy started. And we had more human characteristics going to our physical aspect of ourselves. Since we used to eat so many plants, we'd have a larger gut. Just think, a cow has 4 stomachs as it eats grass. A giraffe has a 180-foot long intestine because it eats leaves all the time. So because we became an omnivore, eating both plants and meat, our intestines shrank, which devoted more energy to the brain. And as before mentioned, as I'll bring up a number of times, the jaw also shrank because of our diets, eating not just plants all the time. So the jaw would be reduced, and you would see more of a noticeable chin, a nose that's more protruding, a melon-shaped head that's roundish, and the head, neck, and shoulders would be all separate, which was much different than the Lucy species that we noticed. And also there was a loss of body hair over time as we became more upright with longer legs. We lost our thick layer of body hair. Finer, shorter body hair made it easier to sweat and perspire to make our bodies cooler. A taller person with longer legs has more surface area, which aids in perspiring. This man could walk further and longer. So the move by ancient man from cooler forested areas to more hot open plains made us sweat more, and these physical adaptations contributed to our survival. Thus, sweating is an advantage. You might think, oh, it's a real pain, I'm sweating, but that's an advantage actually, especially when you're trying to hunt prey or doing things in the outside. That enables us to track animals that can't go that far. Other animals, like on the savanna, African savanna, like would have to pant because they have so much hair on them. And they can run real fast in the beginning, but they have to slow down ultimately because they can't sweat and they have to stop what they're doing. However, we can do better if we carry water with us, like ostrich eggs that were hollowed out. And therefore, we are able to be nomadic, searching for food this way, and with the ability to sweat, we can go long distances, like up to 10 miles per day. So it made man nomadic, but then that's how you learn about the area that you're in by doing this. Was these kind of abilities, and especially with advantages like longer legs. And so evolving traits have helped humans survive in an unstable world. So over time, let's take the face, we changed from, this took millions of years, from being more ape-like over time to go to the kind of Homo sapien we know today, which has different kinds of hair, different color skin, shorter, not as prominent brow ridge, and a smaller nose. Let's take a look at that. How did the skin change? Well, it did because the skin color changed from being very dark, which we would have in equatorial Africa or equatorial South America, because the skin produces melanin, which is a dark brown pigment, to add as a sunscreen to protect from harsh ultraviolet rays at the equator area. However, as man moved further up north, there wasn't a need for that, and the skin became lighter. And with the skin becoming lighter, because there's less sunlight, that's why it became lighter, we need to absorb more vitamin D that way. So the skin became lighter and absorbed that way. So there's different skin colors based on originally where we were from. And this took thousands, tens of thousands, if not longer years to develop. With that, people from equatorial regions have hair that is curly that lets heat escape, which is because they're in an equatorial region. But people from more northern latitudes, like Europe or Eurasia, would have hair that goes over the neck and shoulders to protect it. So darker colored skin, different color hair, and there would even be a variation in eyes due to eye color, due to genetic responsibility, and even freckles. So the skin color would change. These are adaptations because favorable traits are more likely to have offspring, satisfy offspring that are better suited for their environment, which means that nature has a way of compensating us to be able to fit in and adapt to our environment over time. So at one time, there was 4 different species living, and we'll get into all these species. Homo neanderthal, Homo erectus, upright man, Homo sapien, us, or Homo florensis, a small little species that lived of pygmy-type people that were about 3 feet tall that lived on an island in Indonesia that had dwarfism with it due to natural selection. So not only did we change inside and outside, but the environment changed too. Now the Sahara currently is the world's biggest desert. It is 1,200 miles north and south and 3,000 miles east and west. You could put the whole of the United States inside of it. And it does look like this now, and the entire continent of Africa looks like this, but it once was lush and green. So what happened? That's because of climate change. It became more arid, less rainfall, and it changed. But back in the day, and we're going to get into erectus here, when about 2 or 3 million years ago, the Sahara was a huge savanna, which ancient man could hunt animals, as there was trees, grasses, and water there. But this changed. And this all leads to Homo erectus, the one that came after habilis, the one I discovered. And Homo erectus lived from 1.8 million years ago to about 80,000 years ago. So it was around quite a long time. And it was the oldest known species to have human-like body, elongated legs, shorter arms, and the first human species to spread out of Africa. They were tool makers, they were omnivores, and they were the first to control fire. Let's get into them and why, to see what kind of advantages did erectus have to be able to survive and then actually move out of Africa. Well, compared to the Lucy species, you can see that erectus is more like us, more like a walker and endurance runner than the Lucy species, which is more of a tree climber. You can see the difference in the rib cage, the difference in the pelvic region. Theirs is much bigger, they're more brawnier up front, and they have longer arms and hands. We have shorter arms, and we are a bit leaner. We have more of an ectomorph body shape. They had more of an endomorph body shape. And erectus had a bit of more of an arch in its foot. And compared to the Lucy species, and I go back to the Lucy species because it's a good comparison. How things changed over time, so did our guts. The Lucy species would be bulked up here. But we have a smaller intestine here, as talked about, with longer legs and a bit of a more pronounced hip than Lucy species did. And comparable, the erectus that lived well before us would look like this compared to modern man. Would have more hair on him, but the head would be a bit more elongated in the back, which is a little bit left over from the simian chimp era, and would have shorter legs and a little bit longer arms. When we came on the scene, we would have longer legs, less hair, and more of a round-shaped part to our head. So all these adaptations helped erectus live on the African safari plain back then, excuse me. And all these new enhancements then, inside and outside of us, enabled us, erectus, to leave Africa about 1.7, 1.8 million years ago because of all the changes discussed, and so did Homo heidelbergensis, which became Neanderthal, which we'll get to. So erectus left because the environment was changing and would take tens of thousands of years to go up north because the savanna was still lush and green, but they wanted to go through it as it was changing. It went into the Mideast over tens of thousands of years and thousands of generations, and then eventually also settling into parts of Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Northern Eurasia, and Southeast Asia. This is the first migration or out of Africa theory, and when they went through the Mideast, they would go through the Levant area, which is where the Jordan River runs through Israel, Lebanon, and Jordan, which is a very nice and very temperate area. And they started to control fire also. So again, this would be erectus going through northern Africa, into Eurasia, and ultimately into the China area. And to this day, Chinese children are taught they are direct descendants of erectus. And they might have looked like this, running and looking like this. So we know that they were in the China area, erectus was, because of Peking man and Java man fossils here. But the Asians look this way because they have more of an upward orientation of the cheekbones, a broad face with limited projection, a flattened and broad nose, straight dark hair, less facial hair, and shovel-shaped incisors. And ultimately, erectus would die out and be replaced by us, Homo sapiens, so the two might have interbred also. But they were in the China area, and I want to be sure to point that out to you. Once again, and erectus would be in the blue, would go to the areas discussed, but Homo sapien came around in the African Rift Valley about 300,000 years ago. And about 80,000 years ago, they started to move up north. And sapien would replace erectus and would go to the same places that erectus went to in Europe and Eurasia, but expand much further out and would actually go about and be able to be habitable, live in these places about 80,000 years ago, and take tens of thousands of years to get into Europe, into Eurasia, into Southeast Asia, and actually because the sea levels were lower because of glaciation, we're able to island hop to go to Australia and become the Aborigines, and ultimately keep going north and east we're into the Siberian area, and they were able to cross the Bering Land Bridge over 15,000 years ago, follow the coastline, and ultimately become the Plains Indians tribes, and ultimately we know this because there are fossils of footprints here found in the White Sands, New Mexico area that are 20,000 years old. And they would ultimately then become the Toltecs, would become the Aztecs, they would become the Mayas, they would become, and later on, the Incas and the Amazon River tribes. So Sapien was able to take it all the way to the limit from what Erectus was able to do, and their way was able to live in all corners of the world. So actually, we're able to live in all parts of the world after about 15, it took till the last 15,000 years, we were able to do that. So it took that long. And Sapien and Erectus were able to control fire and use it to ward off animals, and a lot of times cook a lot of the meat that they hunted and scavenged for. Well, this is a good thing because over time our brains became bigger, and thinking of us anthropologists are that our brains became bigger because of eating meat, the amino acids in it. The Australopithecines had 500 cubic centimeters. The one I discovered, a bit larger, but by the time you get to Erectus, it would have almost double the amount of brain in it, and we think that's because of the diet change of having more meat and fish. And Neanderthal man would have the biggest at 1,600 cubic centimeters, and Cro-Magnon man is really Homo sapien living in Europe around 40,000 years ago, and we have about 1,350 cubic centimeters. Modern man. So we think it's because of the diet that has changed. Now we go into the more fun parts of this in terms of how it relates more to what you have, more evolutionary psychology. You really don't inherit traits, you inherit factors for traits, like a cleft chin or smooth chin, straight hair or nappy hair, an overbite, an underbite, and because of genetic dispositions, blonde hair or red hair. And you get acquired traits from our environment that we pick up. And all this led to evolutionary psychology, which are behaviors and factors for traits from our ancient ancestors that all make sense when you think about it. We all have agoraphoobia, a fear of dislike of beasts, and this is universal because these are all for survival reasons is what I'm telling you. How did we survive because of our thinking inside of our head? We don't want to run into someone like him, or someone like that, so we stay away. We also have a fear of snakes, and we're able to recognize patterns of predators that are stationary and camouflaged. And we do very, very good with patterns. That's one of the things important about our species, is when we see somebody coming toward us, are they a friend or are they a foe, based on the patterns that we see. Patterns like carrying weapons, patterns like being angry when they're near. And so we can identify this. We even see patterns in the nighttime sky with Orion the Hunter, and we make stories up for this, or Cygnus the Swan, or Gemini twins, or Hercules. And we are so ingrained into making patterns that if you see two circles and a rectangle, you will see a face here, because that's what we do. That's how our brain works. These help us in our environment. Speaking of environment, we also stay away from situations like this, uneven land. If you fell and twisted your ankle back in the day, it's very difficult to survive. So we stayed away. We also fear of high places, acrophobia. That's to keep us away from there. We have a fear of deep water or the oceans, which is thalassophobia. And our sense of smell tells us to stay away from dead animals like this that might be diseased or in maggot or infested ridden. We also are leery of thorns, because you don't want one in your foot if you're traveling around the area. And we instinctively, when you're in the forest, you're not going to eat a berry that's red. You're going to eat a different color berry if you do. We told to stay away from that. We have instinctively away from that. Also, being anxious helps us to prepare for the unexpected. Stress can sometimes be beneficial as it releases cortisol from the kidneys and adrenaline to make us very aware and be on our toes, ready to spring into necessary action. So adrenaline comes up, which is a survival technique that helps speed up the heart rate and prepares us for meeting the unexpected sometimes. Some people are adrenaline junkies and like to have adrenaline rushes, which makes us feel good. But adrenaline is released by the tops of the kidneys and cortisol. And sometimes there's bad stress and good stress. When cortisol is released by the brain, it sends signals to the kidney to release it. And good stress is that sometimes you really need to do things even though you don't want to. Like you really need to make a lean-to survive quickly in case the weather changes, or living out in the woods, or traps to set for animals. So sometimes you have to take care of things, and stress is beneficial. But over time, stress can wear you down and do somatic things to your body that isn't comfortable. Also, at night, we are somewhat afraid of the dark. Why do we fear it? Because we can bump into things that can physically harm us. At night, we turn from top predators to prey, and along with our poor eyesight and poor hearing than most other animals, we're vulnerable to attack. So our ancestors wanted to be hidden in the dark, or sleep in trees or caves to be protected from nocturnal predators and hunters. When we experience fear, the sensory organ sends signals to the brain's amygdala that processes emotions, and cortisol, a stress hormone, is released. Potential threats then develop into our flight or fight response. That means that we can either take something on physically or emotionally and to vanquish the enemy or the problem, or we can run away from it and deal with it another time. And sometimes you can do that with conversations. Sometimes you want to engage somebody, sometimes you just want to walk away. So it applies to a lot of things besides physical confrontations. Dopamine is released whenever you do something like this. It's in the center of the brain. The hypothalamus sends this out, and it rewards us for doing what we did. So that's why we do it more often than one time. It sets a pattern up for it. So it all makes sense to have this kind of response. Also, we're leery of strangers. We have xenophobia. Because when a stranger comes into a group, they produce stress. You don't know what you're going to get involved with, and they upset the social balance. So whenever we meet someone, we shake hands to see their intent. Open hands and openness, like these people here, are a good sign that you want to be with them. But closed fists and being uptight and closed hands don't work that well, with closed arms. So everybody's a stranger until you meet them. And why did religion came about as early man worshipped the sun, imaginary beings or wild animals, and thought that, well, if I want that sun to come out, I need to abstain from something or sacrifice something. I would have been a sun worshiper back in the day. So you do something like that, and that relates to religion or worshiping gods to make sure that you're able to control your environment from the way you think about it, at least. That's the best you can do. We also have binge eating from our ancestors because food was hard to come by. And when it was around, you would binge eat a lot because you don't know what animal might come and take it away. We also hoard food. This is for the same reason, to store it, because you don't know where your next meal is coming from. In modern day living, our freezer is a way of hoarding food. Of course, no one wants to go shopping all the time, but also a refrigerator stores food for a couple of weeks. This does it permanently. Also, if you had a fast metabolism, you wouldn't do that well back if you're an ancient man, because you'd always have to be looking for your next meal, which is very difficult and stressful. However, if you were lethargic and were overweight, that means you couldn't chase the animals you need to hunt. So there has to be a homostasis, which is what we have now. Some of us are afraid of open spaces like agoraphobia, like in the African savanna, in the Serengeti Plains. Actually, there's no animals out here waiting to pounce on you, but no one wants to wander these areas and run into an ostrich that's 9 feet tall with 5 foot tall legs. As well as we're claustrophobia, because the body senses that you're going to run out of oxygen or the place might collapse on you. That's not a good feeling. We also are hunter-gatherers in today's world when we go shopping. We all done this, and as well as online shopping. And we have the shiny object syndrome. That is, we are addicted to things you can hold in your hand that are shiny and bright, like diamonds and gold that will have their luster forever, as well as our cell phone, which is now a surrogate spouse. Just think, you can hold it in your hand, it gives you information, it entertains you, it doesn't judge you on what you do. We've also gained things and lost things over time. Some of these are kind of minor, but we think we had a nictitating membrane, a special opaque membrane that we could see out of that would protect us from dust and dirt back in the day. Some of us do not have a polaris longus muscle at the top part of our wrist, which is kind of small. We can drink animal milk, but some people can't, the lactose intolerant. We used to have the ability to twitch our ear to find out where sounds are coming from, like some animals do. We don't have that. We really don't need our tonsils anymore. But the most important thing was we lost our large canines from the chimps. The canines, well, in chimp world, the male is almost twice as big as the female a lot of times. And when they flash this, that means they're going to bite, and that means they're aggressive, and that does not lead to monogamy. Nobody wants to live with a brute. So when our canines became reduced, and you can feel them right now with your tongue, this is good because it meant toward an equalization of the sexes. That's one reason monogamy came about also, was a reduction of these from other primates who don't have monogamy. This all leads to Neanderthal. We're going to talk about him today because he's a very popular subject to talk about and was the last species to live on Earth prior to Homo sapien. Neanderthals really came from Homo heidelbergensis that left Africa about 400,000 years ago. Some went to the east to become Denisovanes, which were in the Eurasia area, but Neanderthal ultimately went into the European range and took tens of thousands of years to get there, and lived in the European range, like Spain, Italy, Germany area, and a bit into Eastern Europe. They were a bit different than us, and they were alike from us. So today I'm going to tell you is the things that helped make them survive, and some of the things that led them to decline, which is why they aren't here anymore. So I'll show you both sides of the coin. They lived from 400,000 to 40,000 years ago, mainly in Europe. They are noted for a strong brow ridge, a larger nose, and they had a diet that was what they call the caveman diet, I guess you could call it. There's another word for it. And they lived in this area. But let's take a look. Is that we all know we have between 1% and 3% Neanderthal DNA inside of us. That's from interbreeding. When Homo sapien and Neanderthal hooked up about 50,000 years ago in Central Europe. Neanderthals were different than us in that they were shorter than us, were the brain that was bigger, they were more barrel-chested, and were able to eat more of this kind of a diet. And we think that they hooked up in this area right here, and they lived with us for about 10,000 years. Of course, no one in those days would say, oh, you're a Neanderthal, I'm not going to deal with you, or you're a Homo sapien, I don't care about you. Everybody looked about the same in terms of no one knew the difference anyways. So with Neanderthal, they have something called the Bergmann's-Allens rules. That means in a colder climate that Neanderthal lived in, more temperate, more like Central and Northern Europe, their body became smaller. Smaller arms, smaller legs, and the body became more compact and more stout. This is to keep the heat in, as a way of survival, a survival technique that nature develops with natural selection over time. But people from equatorial regions are generally taller, have longer limbs and longer legs to be able to transpire, to be able to release heat. So sometimes it's how you keep it in, heat, and how you lose it, which is very important. That's why there are no Inuit NBA basketball players, but 80% of the NBA is black because of this tendency to have this. We'll also see this in the environment too, like with hares, or that is rabbits, have shorter ears and smaller legs. They don't want to freeze, but in warmer areas, the ears and legs are longer. And we're able to see this with Arctic foxes that have short legs, a stout body, small ears, and the same thing with the polar bear. So the same thing happens in nature also. It's nature's way of making sure that the animals survive, and at least don't have their parts freeze off. So modern humans, Homo sapiens, have a higher brow, narrow shoulders, and are slightly taller. Neanderthals are noted for their high brow ridge because they had that simian-type plant-based diet in the beginning. More of a prominent nose. The prominent nose and the wider nose was for humidifying cold air because they lived in cold, dry air areas. And also, when the two species interbred, they had many attributes that came up with it, specifically like having a better immune system to fight off infections and diseases. This later helped humans overcome contagious diseases. Interbreeding between the two species gave us a quick fix for our immune system. An irritable trade-off from this made us more prone to allergies from pollen, grass, food that could set off or trigger our immune system response. Actually, our immune system is oversensitive and overreacts. We get this tendency from interbreeding with another species. So if you were to look at a Neanderthal man compared to Homo sapien, you will see he'd be about 6 inches shorter, more of a stout body, where we would be more leaner with that. And with that, there are other tendencies that we get from them, like hair color, maybe some eating disorders, I'm going to skip smoking, skin tone, and mood and sleep patterns, which we're going to get into right now. So there was a tendency for them, because the fingers were on the scale because of the interbreeding to have this, is patchy skin, called actinus keratosis, urinary tract disorders. We're able to sequence the Neanderthal DNA and able to realize that when they have urinary tract disorders, that means that it's very hard to mate and to have children. Nothing works right. So this is another reason why they may have declined, and there's a propensity for them to have these disorders, but may have led to their decline in a small way, as well as to hypocoagulation and malnutrition. They used to think it was depression because there wasn't that much light in the northern latitudes, which would lead to depression, but nobody from Scandinavia or Finland is depressed. So I disagree with that. And we also passed down to us was a tendency to stay up longer at night. The northern latitudes that Neanderthals lived in had a greater shift in the day length, which affected the circadian rhythm, which is our sleep-wake cycle, such as shorter daylight lengths in the wintertime. There's also a tendency for them to have blue eyes, about 1 or 2% red hair in the area, in the genetic makeup, and light skin. Light skin then would come into sunburn and would also lead to melanomas, as well as could lead to skin cancer. There's also tendencies, excuse me a second, that we inherited from them, which is type 2 diabetes, which is how you manage sugar levels in your body and to form blood clots. We inherited a gene that is responsible for a protein that causes cells and platelets to adhere to wound areas and inflame blood vessels, which are platelets here in the blue. Of course, when you get cut, if you don't have these platelets, you're going to bleed out. So, this ultimately, though, could lead to strokes in older folks and deep vein thrombosis. We also inherited a gene that makes us feel more sensitive to pain, and plus women inherited more progesterone, which increases fertility and fewer miscarriages, which helps propagate the species. Other links are to Graves' disease, which is a thyroid issue, and rheumatoid arthritis. So for every benefit, there are costs. That means there are pluses and there are minuses with interbreeding. But actually, it's a good thing. So Neanderthal would live in these areas here, and we would meet them in Central Europe. And this is just, I'm taking information that I got from a recent article about this, is that we overlapped with them for several thousand years and showed that our species crossed the Alps in cold climes of northern and central Europe earlier than thought. And Neanderthals tended to live in, or trapped in smaller, colder environments and hard to live with environments that had intermittent glaciation periods. This made them stuck in northern Europe, while us, we dispersed to more other parts of the world. We were more adaptable, living in larger groups after emerging from tropical Africa, and this made Homo sapiens more successful over time. And we talk about Neanderthal men all the time. What about Neanderthal women? Well, you can see the broad nose, the less of a brow ridge here, a tendency to have red hair, and would look like this. How do I know all this? Well, it's in articles all the time. Science is revealing Neanderthal genetic legacy, as well as exhibits like in the Smithsonian here. So that's how I read up on it, and that's how I know. Also, Neanderthals had this big, bulky kind of body to them. Therefore, they needed a lot of calories. It's kind of like being a linebacker, but a shorter one. So you need to eat a lot, between 3,000 and 4,000 calories. So they needed to eat a lot of protein. This can be hard to do when you have droughts and floods. We notice here in Central Florida that sometimes it doesn't rain for a month. And sometimes when it rains, it really floods. So this can be difficult in times of stress of the environment. This might have been another reason for their decline, the amount of food they had to have. And might have lived like this, as well as Homo sapien, in smaller groups, nearby fresh water, particularly in caves to be protected, but had social isolation with Neanderthals because they lived in much smaller groups than we did. And they also were very empathetic. We find their graves, more than a dozen of them, throughout Central Europe. We find that they posed their people, which means they really cared about them, posed the dead bodies, as well as they put beads and other jewelry around them, which means they showed remorse, like showing here. Also, they had empathy because some of the individuals were deformed or had genetic problems, and that leads to a good society when you're able to have other people who are different than you and get along with them. In comparison, Homo sapien would have this large, rounded brain with smaller teeth and a jutting chin. But Neanderthals would have a recessed chin, bigger teeth, and bigger brains up to 1,600 cubic centimeters. This was not especially about intelligence, rather, it was about the optical nerve needed more information, so it needed a larger brain area for that. So the brain would be more hooked in the back, where ours would be more rounded, and would look like something like this. They always look so serious, don't they? That's why I had to find a smiling one. So they were very much like us in that they talked, cooked with fire, made art objects out of bone or antlers, made even flutes out of antlers to play music, used complex tools like scrapers and owls to trim meats, raised children, and wore makeup obtained from shells and made from jewelry. And they were able to make rope, cloths, bags, mats, and nets, and adorn themselves with small objects like eagle talons and red ochre and even black dye for makeup. And what I find to be very interesting was because being an anthropologist, how did they survive? Well, they were ambush hunters, and they would ambush them, they would use the forest to ambush animals in the trees. And they had shorter spears. When you use a shorter spear, though, it's a bit dangerous. I'm not sure if you want to get next to an animal that's about to die, because you don't know what they're going to do. But also, over time, some of their forested areas turned to tundra. And when that happened, they lost the ability to surprise their prey. So this is another reason maybe for the decline. But one thing that I like about them is that they were able to adhere on their spears stone to wood by using tar pitch, pine pitch, and tar resin and heat to be able to do this. It's very difficult to adhere two different kind of materials to each other and make it work. Because if the spear point comes off, there isn't much you have at all. So that's why I like their being inventive. These are what Neanderthal children might have looked like, and a bit different than Homo sapien children here to the right. That means that they were bigger, so they grew up quicker, which means they didn't have their parents' protection, which has put them a bit at risk. So our childhoods lasted longer than theirs, and there may have been a disadvantage because they lived in these small groups with cooperation than we had. And they lived in harder to survive harsh environments. And I'm not clear why they just didn't move south. So, we find about these sites here, the last stronghold was on Gibraltar about 35,000 years ago. They lived like this. So cheer up, you could have a Neanderthal-looking boss. This is how that would look like in today's world. However, we as Homo sapiens were more adaptable and more successful. You know, it isn't really the most intelligent or the most strongest species that survives. It's really the ones most adaptable to their environment. And we're able to do that. Just think of where we can live. In very high altitudes up to 15,000 feet. In Arctic regions, we're below zero quite often. In coastal areas, by water. In deserts, we can even live in space. And very far away places like Fenny. And our diet, as mentioned, did change. We used to be frugivores, or just ate fruit. But over time, we became, like habilis, we became omnivores, eating both meat and plants. And this changed a lot of things about us, particularly our brain, as mentioned. Homo erectus would eat, because they developed the use of fire, would cook, be able to cook meat, and by the time Homo sapiens are really carnivores. So what did this do? Well, by eating meat and fish, this increased our brain size over time. That means, well, here's habilis. He had a small brain about 2 million years ago, but in 2 million years we tripled our brain size. We think it's because of eating meat and fish. So that's how this came about over hundreds of thousands of years. And our frontal lobe increased the most, which is where logical thinking occurs and rational thought occurs. However, this is missing in some people, like in politicians. And then, about 12,000 years ago, we developed agriculture between the Tigris and Euphrates River, generally thought of in Iraq area. Because of this, we became less nomadic and stayed in one place. Small villages became towns that become cities. And with this, we have larger social groups. We're able to deal with 150 people a day. But only chimps and other primates deal with only between 20 and 30 a day. So this increased our brain power too, as well as living in these kind of setups with having agriculture. And with having centralized agriculture, then you can have domestic animals like sheep, goats, and cattle that you can ultimately not only get their meat from, but get their milk from, adding more protein. Of course, if you're going to have agriculture, you better know how the earth revolves around the sun. When to plant in the spring, when to harvest in the fall, when to know the longest day of the year, when to know the shortest day. And having a calendar, something like Stonehenge, would help out, though this has been on a dramatic scale. So that's why you had to pay attention to the sky. back in the day. So our brain is 2% of the body's weight, yet it needs 20% energy to run. Most of you have about 2,200 calories a day, so you need about 400 or 500 calories to make your brain run. We used to have a larger brain, it's true, back in the day, back about 1 million years ago or so, or a couple 100,000 years ago, but our brain has become smaller, not because we're losing intelligence, but because there are more folds in it, making it more efficient inside the brain, having more surface area inside of it. So we did evolve over time to something like this, with the brain sizes here. And any dentist will tell you that it's really the teeth is what counts when you look at somebody. In the way back with prehistoric man, they had larger molars and more of them. In today's world, we have less of them. Our teeth are smaller, and our chin juts out further. In addition to that, we have these wisdom teeth, which we don't need anymore, and they become impacted. That's another reason why we have changed. We still have the stuff from back in our day. Many of you had your wisdom teeth taken out when you were around the college era. So we have changed over time, the last thousands of years. We were generally shorter, lighter, smaller boned, and thinner bones than our ancestors. The decrease has become noticeable in the last 10,000 years. And this is because we've changed our diet more to agriculture and are less physically inclined to go chasing animals. So there's a lot of physical diversity in all species looking different. All one species, but all looking different. So this is how we've changed over time to become us. And you can see in the face itself, you can see how we have changed. So our physical environment, our internal and external, have changed inside of us, as well as our physical environment and other things. And this is how we have become us. And thank you very much. That's the end of this one.